first, thanks for coming out tonight to learn more about securing your IoT devices. And I work for Cisco Systems in their network security, and been working with intrusion prevention systems, and now on their next-gen firewall I do identity-based threat protection and SSL interception and decryption. I've been working in network security and cybersecurity for about 16 years. And I'm here tonight because of my interest in IoT security and not as part of my job at Cisco. So unfortunately what that means is that I don't have Cisco's deep pockets to pay for our food and drinks tonight. But I would recommend that you take a look at what they have here at Sherlock's, and they've got a good selection of food and drinks. Take advantage of that and be sure and give your server a great tip for their service tonight. Wanted to start off with a few IoT security stories, a couple of which have been in the news recently, and also wanted to give the warning that you might feel a little bit worse about the world you live in after we go through some of what we're going through, but hopefully you'll also have a better understanding of securing your IoT devices and therefore help make the world a little bit better place. So this happened last summer. Jennifer, a mom in Houston, I can put it closer to my mouth so
thank you.
It's always an issue of how close do I put it because I tend to have a loud voice anyway. You could probably turn it down just a little bit.
Okay.
Feedback. Thanks. So Jennifer, a mom in Houston, got a call from her friend. Her friend said that she thought she saw a picture of her 8-year-old daughter's bedroom on Facebook. So Jennifer checked it out further, and it turns out that her 8-year-old daughter's bedroom had been live streaming 24/7 everything that was going on the internet. And they had recently gotten security cameras installed throughout their house, and the cameras in their house had been hacked, and someone was live streaming everything this little girl was doing every day. And investigators later found out that the girl had gone on and been playing Minecraft and had hit a rogue Minecraft server, and it turns out that she downloaded some malware from the server. The server went looking for other devices in the house that it could, or her laptop got infected, went looking for other devices in the house that it could take over, and took over the video cameras in their house. How many of you guys heard about the DNS botnet attack from IoT devices attacking DNS servers? So we've got a few people here that are familiar with this. So 50 to 100,000 infected IoT devices. They were DVRs, home routers, and security cameras again, which was just a fraction of the devices that were actually infected, attacked DNS servers. DNS servers are the things that help your computer resolve addresses and figure out where to go on the internet. So for example, when you connect to Google, you connect to a DNS server and it helps you figure out which address you need to connect to get to Google. And so these botnets, these 50 to 100,000 devices, attack these DNS servers and shut them down. And so for a good portion of the day, people were unable to reach major web services like Amazon and also some critical emergency response services as well. And then finally, you'll recognize the movie poster from that 90s blockbuster movie. I had a conversation with a friend, and he was talking about dabbling in IoT, building an IoT device. He put a sensor in his refrigerator that was Wi-Fi connected so he could read the temperature out of it. And so I asked him what he had done to secure the device, and he said, yeah, no, nothing, but it's behind a firewall, so it should be okay, right? What could happen? And so, by now you probably understand that's a little bit of a rhetorical question. Just like the little girls, the cameras in this house with the little girl were behind a firewall, there's a lot of ways to get at something like that. If it goes out and connects to the web, then it's vulnerable as well. So a lot of ways right now that devices are getting compromised. So how big is the problem? So estimates, probably conservative estimates on this, but 10 plus billion connected devices. And a recent study found that over 80% of them are not tested for security. So even if both of these numbers are overly high, you begin to get a sense of the scope of the problem. And when you talk about the real world impacts of compromising devices, you can see why there's a lot of reason for concern about securing IoT devices. So why are people hacking? And obviously one of the reasons is personal gratification. So there's the challenge of being able to hack something. And also there's the reputation that you can gain as being a hacker. And people will use that reputation to move into paying work for hacking. Also there's causes. So things like Anonymous and WikiLeaks and people doing things for political reasons or doing things for causes, hacking computers, trying to get information that they can use. And then that kind of moves into the group or state-sponsored hacking. So you've got whole states that are hacking devices and hacking people's computers to get information and to be able to use that for their purposes. But really the number one answer is money, by far. And so how does that work? How do you make money off of hacking devices, hacking computers? And this is a little bit hard to see up here. This is an example of a website you can find on the internet, of which there are thousands, where you can buy exploits to hack into computers. And it's a bit of an eye chart up here, but it's basically listing the exploits that you can buy and sell on the internet, listing things like you can pay money to get spam attacks, and you can get all kinds of services that you can sell to hack people's computers. And it's kind of important to make a distinction that some hacks, some exploits are worth a lot more than others. So you got high value targets like a chief financial officer for a company. Their computer and getting their financial reports off their computer is going to be a lot more valuable than, say, a security camera in someone's house. And so getting access to, say, a CFO's financial reports, that could go for thousands of dollars, whereas getting access to someone's camera could go for pennies on the net. And then also more potent exploits. So an exploit is something that you use to take over a device, to hack into a computer. And what we see up here is some exploits that are for sale, and you can't read this, I'm realizing, but it's like $1,000, $2,000, so people are selling an exploit that you can use to hack into someone's computer. And the more potent the exploit, meaning the less security protection it has against it, the more you can sell it for. So for example, you're probably seeing your phones and computers getting security updates regularly, your applications getting updated. So a lot of those updates are to protect against vulnerabilities they found in your operating system and your applications. And so if you have an exploit that no one has any protection for, that's going to go for a lot of money. And if you have an exploit that now the recent Microsoft update is going to protect against, or your web browser update is going to protect against, then that's going to be less valuable. So the newer it is, the more you're going to pay for it. And there's the idea of advanced persistent threats that go for a lot of money. And this is where they target a particular individual or a group of individuals, and they're trying to get some information from them, trying to hack into them. And so they may send targeted emails to these people with exploits in the email. When they open the email, then it may give them the next level of hack into their computer. It may even be a coworker of a person they're trying to target. So they'll send an email to the coworker, and then they'll hack that coworker's computer in hopes of getting to the other person's computer. So that's also something that goes for a lot of money. And then large-scale attacks, like we just talked about with the DNS botnet attack, where you've got 50 to 100,000 computers attacking a target. And then what's less valuable, obviously, is the lower value targets like individual devices and the common exploits. And personal information, turns out, generally is not very valuable. So when your credit card number is stolen, it's going for 50 cents or $1 on the internet. Social security numbers, maybe a couple dollars. So it's kind of sad to think about how much of an impact it has on you, and it's going to be going for $1, $2 on the internet. So money is a big driver. And so I wanted to take a look into what hacking into people's devices and controlling people's devices and launching attacks look like behind the scenes. So I'm going to show you a video in just a minute of a security group, a research security group that hacked into a Taiwanese hacking organization. So this security group hacked into this hacking group, and they basically did spend a few years doing studies on them and figuring out what they were doing and what their activity looked like. And so we get to see what it looks like when some high-value laptops get hacked and owned. And because this is Chinese language-based group, they refer to their hacked devices as chickens, which is the Chinese word for like a zombie or a bot. And so they refer to the victims that have gotten hacked as chickens. So you'll see this in the video, and you'll get to learn a little bit about chicken farming in the process. So, and also the security group is doing this for the Black Hat conference that's held every year in Las Vegas. And because they've got some strong accents, so you'll kind of have to bear with this, and hopefully this will pick up okay on the mic. But we're going to spend a few minutes just looking at a part of their findings for their research. So let me see if I can get this going.
They've been abused because of these host
Can you hear that okay?
Yeah. Secondly is the generator tag. The generator tag is for the malware. So when they manufacture these weapons, they also give a tag for these weapons. The KS stands for the name of the weapon. The DOD stands for the slightly different functionality of these particular weapons. So for example, these weapons can be executed low privilege. These weapons can execute it as a Windows service. So not only particular weapons, but how these weapons can be executed in different environments. So they also give a tag.
It's expected to be executed in a target environment.
And also when it was created. So they give label for the victim. They also give label for the malware they manufacture. So everything is very well organized. Later on, they can easily identify compromised victims, compromised website.
Basically, a typical workflow would be the guy, like the owner, he generates like a horse label, he generates the generation tag, and then he produces the documents which he would be mailing, the documents with the exploits which he would be mailing to the target. So each of the documents would be containing the actual expected target and the social marks which we just mentioned.
This is what Theodore mentioned earlier. Why chicken farm?
Yeah, the G here basically because that's the pronunciation of this character. That's why this cross mapping.
Yeah, so low G.
So in traditional botnet model, it's very simple, right? You have your chicken, you have a CPU server, you have a guy like operating it. That's not how this guy operating. They have like multiple chickens, and they have a very complex management problem. So I think they're actually good at it.
We noticed that there are 25 farmers in this chicken farm. But then they raise more than 5,800 chickens across 30 countries, leveraging 4 different botnet protocols. This is also surprising to us because we used to think that one APT campaign always uses only one APT botnet protocols. But for this AO Studio, no, 4. But they didn't lose control of the victims. They still able to access the 5,800 chickens. Very good farmers. And then they have been active since 2007. Still activating, still very active today. This is why we wonder, this is why we say that the previous client server architecture for that botnet architecture definitely cannot fit this chicken farm size. So all these 25 farmers, they leverage automatic systems. This is why they can manage so many chickens.
Yeah, this is a screenshot of the backend management software where they get a list of the nodes they manage, the commands that get executed on the nodes, and the result of the commands. So they can pull files, push files, execute commands, and do lots of other functionality.
This one is crazy. SQ script. It means that when they attack a machine, they don't do it manually. They do it in a script. So when you spend hours or days to remove a malware, they only spend minutes to come back.
High automation.
Yeah, and then they can do it in batch. So they can come back and then compromise several machines at one time. And we cannot demonstrate this to you because that's exactly how they do.
Basically, we obtained a log which records the commands that they push in the machine, and then from the log file, we basically reconstructed their execution sequence. And I think what is interesting here, pay attention how they actually execute the commands. They don't they poke around the machine, trying to find out data and where particular files are there. But once they are there, they actually they use add command to schedule execution of commands for instead of actually directly typing the command, they do this through the schedule.
So by this moment, they already come back. So they only spend minutes to come back, but then you have to spend tens of days to recover it.
And you can see the guy basically looks up the time first, then he schedules the execution within the next minute. So it's it could be the reason why they do this is obfuscation, but so far to us it's not very clear. Maybe you have an idea. But yeah, let's
So not only that, a lot of these functions change C2 servers, change farmers, so you can also take day off as a farmer. So very well organized chicken farm. So this is how they really run these large enterprise.
So basically, they would have a group of people connected to the data center that runs the backend software that communicates to the C2 machines, and the infect machines would be talking back to the C2 servers. These guys would be talking to the C2 servers as well. And if the guy would be pushing a command, that would be the workflow. So command would be pushed to the C2 thing. When this guy calls back, the command would be executed. And the same way, whenever they get the result, this guy sends the result back. Then whenever this guy fetches the result, that's when the guy gets to see the thing. So we actually have a timing based on the log file that we were able to obtain. We can actually reconstruct the timing, when what kind of activity was done on these machines, which brought also very interesting results, which we'll share with you shortly. So
Most importantly, where are the chickens? So we have been talking about the chicken farms for quite a long time, but where are the chickens?
yeah, I think the most important thing here to understand who are the actual victims, the chickens, and how they've been operated. This is basically the breakdown, from the log file of the activities, we were able to reconstruct the IP addresses of the machines which were compromised. So that's basically the breakdown of the most common targets. The majority of machines which were compromised actually was in Taiwan, And like, yeah, here you can see the machines, and we associate them with the country based on the IP address. Then you can see that the second big volume of the machines which was compromised is inside the United States, but there are like many others. Canada, there's United Kingdom, there's Holland, there's Russia, there's Ukraine, there are even a few machines in China. We believe like this thing comes from the point because some of the machines were laptops, so the guy actually like would be sitting in Taiwan, maybe he works for Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then he has to take a trip to China, and once he lands, he opens his laptop, connects to local telecom, and calls back. So the IP address that we would be seeing would be actually IP address coming out of China, for example. And, yeah, if you can go back to the slide, I'll just. And another thing which is very interesting, we'll cover it in a bit of detail. You will see that some people are actually very international. They are often in Taiwan, but sometimes they're coming down to US. So you can see the machine actually like the same machine would be popping up like sometimes from Taiwan IP ranges, sometimes from United States IP ranges, sometimes from Canadian IP ranges. That means basically the guy has type of job which makes him like traveling around these particular countries. So if you remember the horse label, like if you go to the slide, like that's basically a bunch of horse labels which we were able to reconstruct from the logs. And if you look at this, like you can actually get to see what kind of organizations the guys were after, and you can see there's like Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are institutions, there are Ministry of like Energy, bunch of things.
So you can see like a lot of these are government agencies. You see a lot of these are the leading think tanks in Taiwan. And then you also see a lot of media press in Taiwan.
Yeah, and pay attention to this, like this Apple, but this is not the American Apple. This is a Taiwanese Apple. In Taiwan we have one of the biggest newspapers called Apple. So of course these guys were also after the media. So the machines which had the Apple prefix were mostly compromised within this newspaper office.
And this one is interesting. We take a pretty good look of who are the 25 owners. So this is the graph. The 25 owners and their relationship with the machines they control. So this is the graph of the 25 owners and then the machines they control.
So we have like people here and then the machines which they operate. And then you can see that like some of the machines actually shared by multiple users. Like these machines, sometimes this guy would be like pushing comments to them getting the data. Sometimes this guy would be pushing comments getting the data. And another thing which we noticed that the way these two guys would be operating with these machines, they would not be using the same type of backend system each of the time. Sometimes they would be using A, sometimes they would be using B. So
And I think that gives you a pretty good idea of what it looks like when you've got devices owned and what it looks like from the other side with the people controlling those devices. So yeah. Any questions so far, what we talked about? Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. I kind of suspected it, and I'm not surprised at all to see this, but I've not seen it before. So thanks very much for sharing.
Sure. Anything else before we move on? Any questions, comments? Yeah.
What is the federal government's power to prosecute crimes in Taiwan?
Don't know. That's a good question. And the question was, what is the federal government's power to prosecute crimes in Taiwan? And I don't know the answer on that one. I know that that there's pretty strong laws here in the U.S. against hacking and breaking into people's computers. So something to be really careful about. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier there's a website where people will go out and actually buy some of this bad software and so forth.
Right.
Doesn't the government crack down on that type of thing as well?
So the question was,
there's out there, it seems really, these guys get pretty brazen.
The question was, so there's a website, there's actually thousands or at least hundreds of websites where you can buy and sell exploits, or you can say, I want to attack this person's web server or whatever you want to do. And what is the government doing about it? Aren't they coming after that? And the answer is, yes, you know, the government is coming after it, but it's so easy to pop up a website and to move around, and these websites typically operate on what they call the dark web, which is websites where you have to know where to go in order to get there. So you have to have some kind of connection to say, I'm going to go to this website because I know how to get there. And you use tools like Tor, which is a proxy that encrypts all your traffic so that no one can look and see where you're going and who's going where. So it's the same kind of thing. I don't know if you remember, there was I forget what the name, the Silk Road, I don't know if you guys heard about that a few years ago, that was busted selling drugs and everything from drugs to hitmen that you could buy on the internet, and they were busted, but they operated kind of in the same space where it's kind of under the dark shadow of the internet. It's where those websites are set up. And kind of concerning just the level of people, all the government ministries that were being attacked here, and you just wonder how infected is that for us. We saw this in Taiwan, but how true is that for us as well? Anything else?
Well, you mentioned the denial of service attack last year. I think that was
December.
a Linksys IP video camera was the exploit, but more recently it's come out that Samsung televisions that have a built-in camera, that apparently even with the television off, that it continues to stream video out the IP connection in the off state.
So you don't even have to have security cameras installed in your house for someone to be watching you.
It seems like Samsung, I'm surprised we haven't heard more about this, should be liable for a class action suit, or at least forced to replace those televisions that contain this corporate designed exploit.
So I talked with someone who ran a startup incubator for IoT devices, and I asked him what the folks that were developing IoT startups for him were doing for security, and he kind of looked up for a minute and said, "Oh, that's a huge problem. Really needs to be solved. Huge problem. So what are you guys doing? Nothing. You know, people don't have time for that." So, yeah. So it's a question in the back.
Well, not for a statement. I don't have one of the Samsungs that's got a camera, but I have a new Samsung Smart TV, a lower end one. And just about every time I turn it on, it's updating its software. They're updating it for the hacks and stuff like that. So they're constantly sending out updates. And they just probably can't keep playing.
And so you talk about the TV getting constant updates, and at least that's getting updated, right? With all the IoT devices, how many of those, once they're sold and put in your house, are even updated, or wherever else they go?
Well, that's one problem, is that as the Internet of Things grows, as devices become cheaper, when someone's selling a device for under $20, they're not going to have the resources to do testing.
Right, yeah, that's a good point.
How do you see the transition from the Wi-Fi Internet of Things devices to the machine-to-machine low-powered WAN Internet devices? Because the security is way more prevalent amongst the machine-to-machine. Those guys are dealing with the oil companies and the big guys that actually care about this stuff. So,
You'd be surprised.
actually,
The industrial networks are generally the least secure that you'll ever run into.
That's true. So
Okay.
I talked with someone that I work with at Cisco, and he's on the industrial side, and one, it's really scary, and two, he was talking about a new train switching control network that is rolling out across the country, and they were, of course, behind schedule and needed to get it rolled out, and so they didn't have time for encryption and that kind of level of protection. And so a security researcher sat down by the train switch, and I guess it's Wi-Fi, so it's basically open Wi-Fi, and just listened for the commands, reverse engineered what the commands were, and started closing gates and switching tracks, and just showing that you could basically do anything with these national train system. And so, you know, you just think about having a train carrying toxic materials in a major urban area and what kind of disaster you could create doing something like that.
That's actually much more secure than the grid.
Great.
So,
Mojack.
So then what's the solution?
so that's where we're going. So glad you asked. That was a great segue.
We're gonna come up, people in this room are gonna come up with it, we're all gonna get rich.
Absolutely. Great mind.
So before I get into the solution, I wanted, yeah, Dave.
Have there been any reported exploits to the Amazon Echo or Echo Dot?
I don't know. Amazon is pretty good about, you know, you look at Google and Amazon and they're some of the best as far as security goes. Right, so they've got the right, you look at the major companies like Google and Amazon, especially Google and Amazon, and they hire the best of the best security folks. So they're better than most. They're better than most everybody. I don't know if they're, I don't know about the hacking of Echo or, you know, if it is, if it's been exploited, and it probably has, they're keeping it very far under wraps, right? Unless they can't.
Yeah, because I always try to make sure I stay on Alexa's good side, but I know she's always
She
listening.
gets pretty moody
Yeah.
sometimes.
I remember when I first got her, I told her to make me a sandwich. She said, "You get up and eat your own damn sandwich."
Good girl.
So she made you feel at home. So, okay, well, so you looked some about botnets and you heard some about botnets. And so when we're talking about devices that are probably of low value, you know, you're not government ministers or chief financial officers, you're looking at mass control and automation of spreading malware and spreading hacking attacks. So I wanted to kind of walk you through kind of how that spreads and what that looks like. So step one, you've got an infected device over here, and it's got malware on it that says go out and scan different web servers and look for vulnerabilities, and when you find this vulnerability, exploit it, and then you can take over this web server. And so that's step one, is it's going and taking over this web server that's out in the cloud, and it's putting some other malware on this web server that now this web server can deliver to systems that connect to it. So step two is you've got this poor humble security camera again, and it's going out to the cloud to connect to its web server and maybe uploading some video or you know, getting an update or whatever it's doing to its cloud device. Sorry, wrong way. And oh, whoops, it's going to that web server that just got hacked. And so now that web server is delivering malware to this camera. And so now this camera has a different set of malware that's been installed on it. And a lot of the malware is what they call a RAT, which is a remote access tool, which means that when the malware gets installed on the device, people have remote control of that device, so they can download files, execute commands, and if they're hacked at kind of the root privilege, they have full control over the device. And so they now have control over this web server and this camera, and so now they're gonna go ahead and have this camera join the botnet and start looking for web servers that it can hack and install malware on. Or alternately, it can do something, it's now in the home, so it can listen to the home network trying to gather valuable information, like maybe there's some unencrypted passwords going across the home Wi-Fi router, or some other valuable information, or just doing something creepy like spying on the people that live in that house. So how is this happening? What allows this to happen? And so we've already talked some about our OSs and apps that are getting updated, and so they have security vulnerabilities in them, in the OS and the protocol stacks, and in services they're running like web servers and server frameworks and that type of thing, and also the applications that developers write to put on these devices. Just as bad as insecure configuration. So you can have secure software and then you can have it configured incorrectly and just open up a huge security hole that allows that device to get hacked. And finally, it's not protecting data like passwords, so you have insecure passwords insecure, or you leave backdoor access, so someone says, hey, you know, I'm going to be developing on this device, I'm going to set up some telnet access to it, and you just leave that telnet enabled and you deliver the device, and someone, you know, easily hacks into the device. So I'm going to launch into a little more technical here, and I apologize for the folks that are not programmers. This is C code, so it's part of my native language. So I'm going to, hopefully it's clear enough what's going on here. I can hopefully explain around it for the people that aren't C programmers. But one of the most common vulnerabilities in software is something called a buffer overflow vulnerability. And let me try to walk you through what's happening when this occurs. So we have this simple function in some software that says, I'm going to check a password, and someone's going to provide me with a password and input, and I'm going to check it to see whether the password's valid or not. And I've got a little variable here that I'm going to set to say whether it's valid or not, and I'm going to set it to false to start out with. And already I'm off on my C code because I put false in quotes, which you wouldn't do. But we're going to say it's false here.
And there's no semicolon either.
Yeah, there's no semicolon. So my compiler would have barfed on this, but we'll ignore this for now. And then we set aside some space for storing the password. So we're going to go off and we're going to, let me walk over here. We're going to go off and, can you guys see this okay? It's pretty pixelated right up here, but hopefully you can see it all right. But we're going to have this function that says, we're going to go read the password from input. So there's this function called getPassword. And it's just going to take whatever's in the input and put it in that 40 characters of space that we set aside for the password. And then we're going to call a function right after it that says, go ahead and just validate this password you just gave me. And if I can read the password from input, and if I can validate it, then I'm going to set valid to true, saying, yeah, you've got a valid password, and I'm going to go ahead and return, yeah, this is valid value. I'm going to return from the function. And so then whoever called the function to see if the password was valid, they'll get true if it was valid, and false if it was not, or some semblance of false if I hadn't put quotes around it. But anyway, now the problem here is that whoever was writing the software in their getPassword function, they didn't know that you had a 40 character limit. They're just reading whatever comes in from input. They're putting it in this space, and so now what you can do is you can, if someone wanted to give you more than 40 characters for your password, they could, and you would just begin overriding other areas in the program with whatever else they sent you. And this is actually pretty simple. Someone puts in their input, they give you a little bit more than 40 characters, and they actually give you just more than 40 characters. So they give you 40 characters, and then they return a few more characters that map to a true value. And what happens is the way that the C compiler and all of that work is that it has a stack where it stores all its values, and the stack grows from the top to bottom. And so as you fill things up, it actually overwrites all of this space, and then it overwrites the isValid value. So when someone puts a true value there, it actually now, when you write the password in here, it actually overwrites the isValid value with true. And so now you go through and you get the password, and it fills up those 40 characters, and it overwrites the isValid value. And then you call the function to validate it, and the validate function says, no, this is gibberish. It's not valid. And so it says, no, it's false. So you never actually get to this line of saying isValid is true, but it doesn't matter, because you've already now overwritten the false with true, because that buffer overflow allowed you to do that. So you return true from this function, and now whoever has just attacked this software just got in without a valid password. So that's a pretty simple example of how you can take software and exploit it and find a hole and use that to get some kind of hacking advantage on it.
Wait, so they typed in like a 41-word password, and that's how they got
Yeah. So isValid is probably actually it's probably 4 bytes. So they typed in like a 44-byte password, and the last 4 of those mapped to true, and so it overwrote true over the false, and they just got in. Yeah, question?
Isn't the real vulnerability here that they got a hold of the source code?
Well, so you think of open source, right? So the question was, isn't the real vulnerability they got a hold of the source code? But you think of open source, right? So much of what we run these days, from Apache web servers to OpenSSL and web frameworks and all of that, just across the range, is open source. And so someone just has to research and find that. And that's the other thing is hacking into companies and stealing their source code. And so even on closed source systems, if you've got a vulnerability in your company where you think of the weakest link of someone not having very good security practices on their laptop, they come in and they download the source code and someone says, oh, let me grab that off your computer, and now we've got the source code for your product. So that's another way to get at it. So, yeah. Any questions on this? Fairly clear?
Yeah, do you set a standard for companies? Like, is there a checklist of sorts?
There is, and we'll actually get to that. So that's a great question. I want to get there. So really kind of starting to dig into the problem, and I apologize, it's going to get more technical from here. Especially, let me hop over here. So we're going to dig in and look at security from a Linux perspective. And so a lot of the principles we'll go through will actually apply to other platforms, but apologies to people who are not, real experienced in Linux, but I think you'll get some of the ideas anyway. And also, I will post a resource sheet up on the Meetup page, as well as the Slack list that'll go through all the Linux stuff that I went through. So you don't have to feel like you have to copy it down or capture what's going up here. I'll get the Linux stuff up here and so identify the resources and commands that we were talking about. But these are the three main things I want you to remember when securing your devices. So you're looking at securing the platform, applications, and data. So the platform is the OS, the services, configuration, and then the application is your own applications or third-party applications that you're putting on the device. And then also sensitive data like passwords, credit card numbers, that type of thing. So there's going to be a quiz on that a little later. Yeah, question?
Is there any hardware level security?
So the question was, is there a hardware level security? And the answer is yes. Yeah, they have chips that will provide like hardware level cryptography, so you can use. And let me give you just a really brief blurb on how that would work. So you've got an application that you download somewhere. That application has a digital signature that goes with it. And you can actually use encryption hardware on your device to verify that application was validly signed, so that it wasn't tampered with. And so you can actually look on your drive and say,
so there'd be a key burned into firmware?
Yeah, it's a little more complicated. So about a key burned into firmware. The problem with a key burned into firmware is that if someone was able to hack into your device and get control of it, they can read that firmware.
Gotcha.
So what it would be was actually saying, I'm going to take the data from this application, and I'm going to take their signature, and I'm going to say, you go decrypt it and give me an answer back whether it was valid or not valid. So it's a little more complicated. I was just talking with Leo, and he was saying that ARM is even starting to incorporate some of the security features like that. So it was just on high-end devices like the $250,000 systems that Cisco sells, but now you're looking at some much more humble devices and chipsets that are building these hardware features, which is really good.
It's actually part of the requirements that Microsoft has put down for Windows 10 based computers, that they have to have a trusted platform manager chip.
Okay, so that's a
2.0 level or greater, which is essentially intended to allow you to do credentialing on your certificates and what have you.
right. So that's a good point. So in order to run Windows 10, you have to have the hardware level security protection in there. And that's maybe where I'm a little bit behind on the times there and dealing with other products.
Yeah, Mr. I have a Mac.
You're not interesting to hackers.
So in securing your platform, the first first step is to reduce your attack footprint, to get rid of the software, the services, the listening ports, all of the things that you don't absolutely need on there to serve the mission your device is trying to serve. And so every piece of software that you run, every open communication channel is one more area that you can, that leaves you open to being hacked, that leaves you open to a security vulnerability. And so we were at a security conference a while ago, and we got into the conversation about car hacking and what a problem that had become. Not carjacking, but car hacking. And one of the guys in the discussion said, "Yeah, my car, I'm certain can't be hacked." And so everybody was a little bit skeptical, and another person said, "Yeah, how can you really be so sure that your car can't be hacked?" And he said, I'm pretty certain my '69 Camaro can't be hacked." So someone recognized the '69 Camaro before he said it. But yeah, that's a great example of reducing the attack surface. There's nothing in this car from a electronic perspective to hack unless you maybe cut the spark plug wires or something like that.
What about Michael Hastings, the journalist that randomly was driving his Mercedes and ran into a tree going like 120 miles an hour while he was breaking a story on, no?
But you're saying that was an example of
Michael
maybe...
Hastings, he was a big journalist, and he already broke a story on a huge journalist, a huge general, basically disported his career, and he was on his second career, and he bought a Mercedes, and he was paranoid of being hacked, and then all of a sudden, his Mercedes miraculously 120 miles an hour rammed into a tree. This is about 2013.
So that this suspicion was that his car had been hacked.
Yeah.
And now we find from the WikiLeaks release on CIA tools that the CIA can, in fact, hack that exact car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's concerning just how much can be hacked, right? And so, like, 69 Camaro is pretty safe though.
Good. Everybody drive a 69 Camaro. Well, that'll be good.
So the other thing is, so how do you go about reducing your attack footprint? How do you go about determining what's running and how to secure it, how to reduce that? And so you've got the common Unix tools like top and PS that you can use to get listings of what's running. Netstat will show you the list of what's listening. I'll give you an example of that. So you run the netstat command, and it can tell you all the listening services. And already you can find some concerning services like FTP and RPC, things that are generally not secure. And so these are things that if you don't have to have them, if there's not a good reason to have them, and really, if you're going to put this in an environment where it's not protected well, you're probably open to vulnerability. So.
Yeah, this is a little more straightforward in a Linux environment than it is in any other environment, isn't it?
It is, but so Linux does give you more tools to give you insight into what's running and how it's going. And so other environments can present more challenges. That's a good point. And so you look at disabling the things that are insecure, like Telnet, FTP, rlogin, rexec. And replacing them with secure services like SSHD. And if you have a headless device, turning off X windows, you don't need a desktop. Dave?
From my own experience, if you're running an SSH server, don't use it on the default port 22.
Right, good point. Yeah, don't use it on port 22. And actually, I'll talk about another thing that you have to be careful of in just a minute when we get into the configuration. But I've included, for people that are not real Linux heads, so I'll include some websites that help you with identifying and disabling services on your system.
I know in Windows, one thing that's good to do is when you're like browsing or something, you use an user account instead of an administrator account.
Right.
Is there a similar level of account controls in Linux?
Yeah. So the question was the observation was that in Windows you can use a unprivileged user account rather than an administrator account, and that can help provide some protection, and that's absolutely true. And in Linux, it is the same thing, is that you can have users that are members of groups, and groups get assigned privileges, and so you can have less privileged users. And the idea is you want your software running with the least amount of privilege that's needed. And that way, if someone were to compromise your software, then their privileges as to what they can do are limited. So if your software is not running at root privilege level, someone compromises your software, then it's harder to get root privilege on the box through that compromise. So good point. And another thing you can do is enable a firewall on your Linux systems. So you've got a really simple, uncomplicated firewall, UFW, or the graphical version, GUFW, that you can turn on. And basically that uses the lower level IP tables, TCP/IP filtering tools that have been part of Linux forever. And you can, if you're familiar with IP tables, rather than using the firewall, you can configure those directly to really set up, here's what I want going in and out of my network. So those are things you can do. But if you're not very familiar with it, just enabling the firewall is a really good step to limit the exposure of your device to the network. Any more questions so far? Oh, yeah.
I've got a simple Windows 7 and things like that, and I've got malware on it, but Kaspersky, good stuff like that. Do I need to put some other stuff on it or not? I mean, you don't want them cross-talking things, I know, but those things, what I have seems to be working. But
yeah, the question was, so we've got Windows 7 and have the antivirus programs and
the malware.
And malware protection, detection, I guess. And I mean, that's a good start, right? And as we get towards the end, we'll talk about nothing is really going to give you absolute protection, but you can begin to raise the bar. Yes?
I was going to ask about Apple. Can you comment on Apple's software and where?
I would just say, how many security updates does your Mac or your iPhone get?
All the time.
Yeah, so it's vulnerable. And the more you put in there, the more vulnerable, attack surface again, the more vulnerable it is. Yeah.
You were pointing out that there is you can monitor what services are running. Are those functions in Linux scriptable?
Sure, yeah, the question was, are the functions in Linux to monitor things scriptable? Absolutely.
Because you could certainly write scripts to set off,
right, alarms if you saw something
if you
bad
saw
happening.
a risky service suddenly start running.
Right, yeah, absolutely. You can write scripts to monitor things and set off alarms. One of the problems is they have what they call rootkits, which install. Yeah. We talked about the RATs, where you have the remote access tools, and rootkits are what gets installed on your device to enable those, where you can send commands and run things on those devices. And the problem is rootkits have gotten increasingly effective at hiding themselves. So they'll hook into OS services and actually hack like file listings and stuff like that, so they hide themselves better. So it's kind of a game of cat and mouse with some of that.
And they're also operating below the OS level.
Right, yeah, and also they'll at least get in and really dig deep down into the kernel and bury themselves and hide themselves well. So Dave?
You ever work with Snort?
I do. As a matter of fact, Cisco acquired Snort, and that's the product I work on right now. So yeah. So yeah.
Would it make sense to actually do the exact opposite and increase your footprint by just spamming all your ports with a dummy daemon process that doesn't do anything?
So I don't know. It's that people do things like they put honeypots, something called honeypots out there, where you put stuff on your network that tries to entice people to come in and hack it, and then you can get some visibility into what's actually attacking you and that type of thing.
So it does make sense.
It does make sense. You probably wouldn't want to put it on a device that you're really trying to protect. But but you would do it on, you could do it beside your device and then get some insight into what's going on in your network and where there might be attackers coming at you. And the other thing that's a challenge, especially for IoT devices and things that you deliver to customers, is getting security updates on those devices. So just like we talked about, for your computers, for your phones, you're getting regular security updates. And the same is true for software packages and OS updates on your computer, that almost every time I turn on my server, it's got another update on it, or log into it. And so it's important to get those updates onto your devices, because what it means is without those updates, you now have security holes in your device. But that creates a challenge, which is you've got your software that you've developed and you've delivered on your device, and you've got a configuration you've tested and you're confident in, and now you get an update to some libraries you're using, you get an update to the OS, to a protocol stack, and is that going to break your application? Could it have some side effects you hadn't anticipated on the good, smooth running of your application? And I mean, I think the answer is that's a possibility, right? So how do you balance the two of closing those security holes, but also making sure that you're not breaking the running of your device in a customer environment or somewhere else? And I think that's a challenge. It's a tension between doing those two things. One way to solve that is to go through a regular update cycle where you update security, you retest your software to make sure everything looks good, and then you deliver all of that as a package. So that's one possible approach to doing that.
You know, Jeff, and that's exactly why the place I work, that's why we're still running PHP 5.3 on Ubuntu 12.4.
Right.
That very reason.
Right, and how many holes are in that?
It keeps me awake at night.
But it's hard to update something and know that you're not going to break everything. Yeah, it's a challenge, and there's a tension between security and the running of your product. So that's one reason why when I said, well, what are you doing for security? The man shrugged. It's a hard problem to solve. And this is something that I really think is great for everybody. Secure configuration. So we talked about securing the device with secure configurations of your services, of the things that are providing security for you. This tool, Linux, is a great tool. It runs as, so someone was asking about scripts that can do some of this. It runs as scripts, so it's just shell scripts that run. So you don't need a certain Linux distribution. You don't need certain software on your Linux in order to run the Linux audit program, and it will go through and audit your configurations, your running services, and give you a listing of any problems that it finds. And it doesn't stop there, because it also gives you URLs that you can go to help you understand what the problems are and how you can remedy them. So it's a really great tool, and highly recommend that if you want to look at how your device is doing security-wise, put that on your Linux-based device and use it to check that out. So when I did that, so I was working on my Raspberry Pi, and I did the good thing, and you turned off a lot of services, no telnet, all that, and just using SSH server, and installed the SSH server, and then I'm thinking I've got it all covered, I'm good, and I run Linux on there, and it tells me that SSH in the default configuration I installed it on has unprotected root login configured. So you can log in as root over SSH, no password required. And so it found that for me right away, with a big red flag, and I was appreciative of that. And so someone had asked,
how do you, when you're creating an IoT device, you might be using, let's say you're using Debian as your basis. you might be using a Wi-Fi module from someone, and you might be using a camera driver from someone. How do you, when you've got all these different software modules from different makers, how do you make sure everything is harmonized and everything is working together from all these different
Right.
sources?
Yeah, I mean, that's an absolute challenge, right? And then the second challenge is how do you make sure it's hardened from a security perspective?
Well, that's
right?
what I mean,
Yeah, and part of it, you know, I don't know that there's a great answer there. Part of it is going back to the reputation of where you're getting it from,
Are there developing standards that are gonna help us in that respect?
Yeah, and that's exactly, I mean, I'm exactly there right now.
okay.
So OWASP is a great organization, and they're all about secure development. And they have been primarily focused on web application security, which is the WAS and their name is, and so recently they've started getting inroads in the embedded world as well. And so they have a standard on their site for embedded security development as well as web security development. And they really walk you through a lot of the practices. They have a checklist of these are the things you should do, these are the things you shouldn't do. Things around protecting its buffer overflows, for example, and what the C library has a number of calls they consider unsafe from the buffer overflow perspective. So they'll call those out and say these are things that you shouldn't do. And so they walk you through 10 or 12 different steps, things that you need to pay attention to from a security perspective. It's the embedded part is, it says it's relatively new, it's not comprehensive, but it's a great place to start. And understanding if you're getting stuff from vendors, what they're doing for security. If you're really trying to verify, am I getting something that's secure and protected? If you're able to establish that relationship with the vendor and understand what they've done from a security perspective, that's probably farther than most people go in doing that. Yeah, question?
Actually, as just a comment, I was gonna say, you really ought to make sure if you're doing anything like this, that you conform with OWASP at an absolute minimum. And probably the biggest reason for that is the FTC has sued several companies in the last year or so for selling products that they think are insufficiently secure. Now, whether or not the federal government actually has the legal right to do this is a good question, okay, but they're doing it anyway. They have sued ASUS, TrendNet, and D-Link. And one of the things that they've used in all three of those cases was they said, you didn't even comply with OWASP. So this is something you probably need to pay attention to.
This is not the end-all be-all, but
No, it's not.
It's a great place to start.
It's a starting place that everybody's expecting you to be in.
Right, and unfortunately, this is far more than most organizations do.
It's
just that.
To answer your question, how do you fix this? You don't generally by yourself. You have a team of people do it. Okay, it's not. This is well beyond most individuals' ability to do.
Right, but what you can do is at least in your software control what you're doing and understand where your vendors are as well. And NIST is actually putting out a much more comprehensive IoT, or maybe it's embedded device security standard. That's pages and pages and pages. So, and I haven't read it, but I know of its existence, and that's probably a lot more thorough than what we're going through here. And that's the other thing I would warn is that I'm really trying to hit the high points in this presentation, but there's obviously a lot more depth to this, and there's areas I'm going to miss because I'm not aware of. So.
Why do they have a don't roll your own crypto?
Oh, that was my own, which is don't roll your own crypto.
No.
Just don't do it. So use standard crypto like OpenSSL. Don't even if you use crypto functions that you get from somewhere rather than develop yourself. When you put them together and try to perform a end-to-end crypto operation on something, the odds are you're going to get it wrong. And so, so much of, like, you look at a standard like OpenSSL or the TLS standard, and so much of that has been through cycles and cycles of not only vetting to figure out how to close all the security holes, but finding more and more security holes and getting those fixed. So these are people whose whole life is about cryptography and making secure computing operations, and they're challenged to get it right. So as someone who's not in that space, it's really hard to do correctly. Any more questions before we move? I would say one more thing is that if you're putting either a web server in the cloud or on the device, you absolutely should go to OWASP for their web application security, because they have test tools there, great guidelines, and really show you where the dragons are as far as web server security goes.
Just a quick comment, OWASP has a local meetup group here in town. Matter of fact, they just had their meeting today. They meet 10 months out of the year, once a month over at National Instruments during lunchtime. So you can look them up on Meetup. They have a big conference.
I didn't know that, thanks.
Yeah.
So that's a great opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into secure development.
Yeah, they have people come in from all over the country to speak to them.
And they're, as far as I know, they're a service organization, so they're just a great organization. And finally, securing sensitive data, and this slide's I apologize, it's gonna be pretty wordy, but obviously you don't want to leave default passwords on your device, the admin, get rid of that right away. Pi, Raspberry, get rid of that, change it. But in Linux, there's the pluggable authentication modules, PAM, that is usually configured by default for Linux distros. And your Linux program will help you understand if you've got it configured correctly, use that. It will hash and protect your passwords. Sensitive data like passwords, credit card numbers, I would recommend, if you can, off box, but if you're logging into your box, obviously you need passwords on there, and use something like PAM to protect your passwords. If you want to do off-box authentication, there's protocols for that like Radius and Kerberos. And now what about authenticating your device to the cloud? So you've got your IoT device, you need to connect to the cloud. That can be a challenge because usually you need some kind of key to authenticate your device, and the protection of your key and that type of thing can be challenging. And there's okay solutions to that, but in my opinion, there's not great solutions to that. Dave?
How long has that Linux tool been around?
I think Linux has been around for several years.
At least a couple of years.
Yeah.
A little longer.
Yeah.
How long? Couple of years?
Yeah, I think,
It's not new.
right, I would, at least probably in the 5-year range or so, because it's been through a lot of iterations.
Thank you.
With what you were talking about there with communicating with a cloud service or a cloud data space, does AWS and Google have tools for that? I would imagine they do.
Yeah, so the question was, does AWS have tools for communicating with cloud space? And they do, but again, they use keys and that type of thing, and it's how do you protect your keys on your device so that if someone gets onto your device, how easy is it for them to grab your keys? How do you secure those? I'm not as familiar with some of the secure computing chips and what you can use to do authentication on those. There might be some capabilities where you can have the device give you a challenge. You can use the secure chip on your device to
Two-factor authentication.
Yeah, well, like two-factor authentication, but it's basically kind of a challenge and response where you have to hold the key in order to respond correctly. And you might be able to use some of the hardware to actually accomplish that. And that's not an area that I'm as familiar with, but that would be the ideal solution, is if you could have protected hardware where you could get some kind of key challenge response. Otherwise, you're kind of limited to embedding your keys in your applications and protecting those with maybe another layer of encryption in your application, and it is a little bit challenging. It's easier to authenticate the cloud to your device. So you can put keys on your device and keys in the cloud, and if you trust that the cloud's not going to get compromised, then you can say, oh, okay, this is clearly I can authenticate that you're the cloud coming to my device. It's harder going the other way. And I would just say cloud should have, any application you write in the cloud should have a healthy distrust of devices. And I'll limit what they can do for that reason. So maybe a one-way data feed up into the cloud. You know, the device can send data up to the cloud, but it can't overwrite data or it can't replace stuff, you know, that type of thing.
I'll just say AWS has authentication, identity authorization services, as well as key management services. A lot of people don't use this stuff, but I've built HIPAA compliant solutions on top of the AWS security infrastructure.
Yeah, I assume.
And it obviously works very, very well within the AWS environment, but there are also pieces of that you can pull down if you've got other servers that are interfacing to these systems. So they've got code that you can pull down and run on your Windows servers or Linux servers, whatever. If you've got an embedded device that's smart enough to run Linux, you can actually do it that way.
Right, yeah, it comes down to how well is that data protected on, you know, could someone get access to your device and
Right.
actually extract some of the
You
data?
get physical access, all bets are always off.
Right, and some of the secure compute chips can actually help with that,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's how bad do you want it?
Well, once again, you're also limited in, on these really inexpensive devices. You're gonna have limited memory, limited processing power, and that's gonna limit how much encryption you can do and how well you can protect your keys.
Right, yeah, it's exactly right. Is on more limited devices, it's harder to secure them. But it doesn't mean that they need security any less. It's just the problem's harder. The nice thing is we've got a bit of Moore's law on our side. So, you know, things that were on a watch right now, and 2 years from now, you're going to have a lot more on a watch. So, you know, hopefully that will help us get better security solutions in the future. And so wanted to talk about taking it to the next level, that security is really an iterative process. So the things I've gone through tonight aren't comprehensive by any means, but it's a place to start. It's a lot better than not doing it at all. And then you can start somewhere and continue to improve your device's security. So I want to come back to the quiz now. So what are the 3 things we talked about securing tonight? Platform, application, and data. So great, good job. So I'm also interested in talking with people about what they're doing as far as security, especially IoT developers, understanding what they're doing to secure their device, what's meeting their needs, what's not. I'm not selling anything, so you won't get a sales pitch or anything, but I really would like to get insight into where IoT developers are with security and what their needs are. So love to talk with you, or anyone you know that's doing IoT development.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Dan gives away prizes with this question.
Man, Dave just raised the bar here.
So, you have a laptop. So what's your policy how do you treat USBs that people give away?
It depends on whether it's Dan or not.
You know,
that was a good one. That was sealed up. That's legit.
It's still sealed as much as you trust
That
PNY.
doesn't mean it's safe.
You know, that's a very good point. Everything that you've talked about tonight are exploits that come in through the network connection.
Right.
But the USB connection is local.
Oh, it's scary, right?
And by default, it's going to auto-load an executable you plug into it.
Yeah, my default position is I don't connect USB to anything that I don't have know exactly what I'm connecting to and where it is. So I'll connect my phone to the computer, for example, maybe.
This is how the Mossad shook the Iranian centrifuges apart.
Right.
With Stuxnet on a USB key.
Which was a beautiful exploit, by the way.
It was. What's even scarier is that when hackers get into manufacturers' servers, that you can actually have products being shipped out that are already rooted, already have malware in them, and the manufacturer doesn't know it.
Yeah, I won't tell you stories I know about in large companies where they've had to protect themselves against the CIA, but we'll stop there. So there's other steps that you can take to move beyond what we've talked about. So Just doing what we've talked about, right, is gonna get you a lot farther along the way than where most devices are right now. One of the next most important steps you could do is set up monitoring of your devices to see if there's anomalous behavior going on, unexpected things. Alien Vault's a great way to scrape syslogs off your device and manage them and look for vulnerabilities. It's open source.
Does it do traffic monitoring as well?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer on that. Traffic monitoring, there are other tools you can use like Wireshark and that type of thing to do traffic monitoring as well.
Well, yeah, but Wireshark doesn't
Really
it's
do
not
the
really
security in it, right,
focused.
right. You can use Snort, for example, for traffic monitoring, an open source tool like Snort to do the traffic monitoring.
I was gonna ask about that, since Cisco acquired Snort, is it still open source?
Yeah, Snort is absolutely open source, and Cisco's continuing to contribute back to Snort, so that's kind of good.
Question on your last line, why don't you have AppArmor on there?
That's a good question. So SE Linux, Tomorrow, and AppArmor would be there as well. So yeah, good thought.
Okay.
I was wondering how did you get those to make the list?
Pardon me?
The last three that you just.
I'm grabbing some stuff and throwing them on there rather than, really the exhaustive best list. And SE Linux is actually kind of old, and a lot of what they came out with now has been incorporated into mainstream Linux. And so I would say really, these are places you can go to take it to the next level. But the main thing is that the idea is perfect security is unrealistic, and the idea in the security community is if someone wants to hack something, they will, and you're not going to be able to protect it unless you're just absolutely disconnected and isolated and completely air-gapped from the rest of the world. And then you have to question what is the purpose of this device if it's completely disconnected from everything. So what you can do is by following good security practices, you can raise the bar a lot over what the other devices that are out there. And it kind of reminds me of the story of the two hikers that are in the woods. And a bear comes charging out of the woods at these hikers, right? And one of the hikers takes off and starts running, and the other guy says, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't outrun the bear." And the hiker says, "I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you." And so the idea is, by securing yourself, you're going to make yourself much less of a target than other devices out there. And you probably will be much less likely to be exploited for that reason. So hopefully, as you've seen this dark world of hacking, you're not too down about what's going on, but hopefully by understanding how to better secure your devices, you can help do your part to make the world better. So that's it. Any more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, one other thing that's important that you didn't touch on is users. Because user behavior
Those pesky users.
Yeah, is a real big problem. So doing things like locking out bad passwords like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and admin.
Man.
Just think of ways that users can compromise your security and prevent those behaviors.
Right, locking down the device so it limits what users can do, making them change their password every so often. All those annoying things that your system makes you do.
Yeah.
So, good thought. Yes?
Just a general comment. I'll probably spend most of my year this year going to various venues, listening to legislators talk around the world about how we need to secure the Internet of Things. I think we have to look at this from a policy point of view as well, because if there isn't due diligence being done, the legislators are going to start doing due diligence for the developers, and when you say clipper chip, stuff like that,
Right.
So, I think this is really important to know what's going on out there in the legislative and policy world, because this is
The people that understand at least how to secure your devices are going to tell you exactly what you need to do to do it.
Well, also a big behavior modifier is what you were talking about, is liability. That is a huge thing for companies. It's protecting themselves from liability.
Yeah, and just even the importance of brand to people, knowing that, your brand gets tarnished or ruined by doing that. And as well as, like we saw, lives get ruined by people getting hacked.
Yeah, I wish that would have happened a little bit when S3 went down for AWS.
Didn't hurt Volkswagen, their stock is up.
So well, I want to thank everybody, especially for the folks that hung in there through all of this. Anything else? I'll be around if you